This is my Chaplin Terminator armour. If you're wondering where the model is, I haven't got one. I think we should change that. Of the Chaplin in Terminator armour, we're going to use the Captain from the Viathan box set, or the starter set, which is how I got this. This is another one that I own, but it was second hand, so it shows that second hand models are just as good and can be used for a lot of things. And I don't have his base or his tactical rock, his little topper, his right tilt shield, or his head, but I've got everything else, and that's all we need for this kitbash. This is what the model looks like. As mentioned, it's second hand. I didn't prime it or broke it accidentally. This is how it came, and we can use this very well. For the Crozius, I'm going to use his right arm with the sword and replace it with the little fire brazier from the Spearhead issue 1 box set. To get the brazier, which will be the Crozius in this situation, onto the arm, I had to cut the hand off, which I did with a scalpel, and then afterwards I was able to glue on the arm, and I also glued it to his leg eventually, just to make sure it was secure. Before any gluing though, I always made sure to use blue tack as my source of dry fitting. I started to dry fit some different helmets, and I eventually came to decide to use this Chaos helmet. It is Chaos on, Heresy, this, that and the other, but it looks good for this situation. The previous owner added some bits onto his back, so I had to start sanding off the glue, as I was going to attach some 3D misprints onto the back, which gave it some scales and bone. To help make this model more unique, I decided to chop off the belt and replace it with a 3D printed one from Grey Tide Studios. Again, to make this model more unique, I decided to cut off the crux terminatus and this little bit of parchment on his leg, and made it all smooth by using a scalpel and sanding it. After gluing everything together, I mixed up some green stuff, as I'm going to make some green stuff scales for his shoulder pad and cape. The templates I'm using are homemade. I used the dragon toy and used green stuff on top of it to get a 3D texture, and I used that to make my template for all my scales. Afterward, I decided to add a bit of a holy relic. I'm not too sure what they are, but they look pretty cool, and it helped differentiate between the Captain and the Chaplain. I then started to make the base, where I started experimenting with different cork levels, as he did need a tactical rock because his base is moulded with the rock, and I don't have that, so I'm having to make it up my own, and this is what I came up with. I'm going to be painting with a non-metallic metal style of painting, so a little bit of tips and advice is to take pictures from different angles with light to help show reflections and stuff in your painting, so if you keep that by your side, it's a lot easier to do. Our first layer for black armour is going to be a mix of Eshin Grey and Abaddon Black, and that's just going to be on a lot of the armour where we want all the highlights to be. We are then going to move up to just pure Eshin Grey. Next is Eshin Grey mixed with Dawnstone at a 50-50 ratio. We are then going to move up to pure Dawnstone, moving up the likeness to a Ulthuan Grey and Dawnstone mix. Then lastly, just a pure Ulthuan Grey highlights. We are then going to do a 50-50 mix of Black Templar and Adrax Agathon over all the armour, even the bits that haven't been painted, just to add shade and colour, and also soften it down from very bright to more of a dull black. Afterwards, we re-highlighted with Ulthuan Grey on all the edges and anywhere we want it to be very bright, so the brightest point on all the armour. To start on all the bone areas, I used a base coat of Rhinox hide. Next, I layered on a 50-50 mix of Baylor Brown and Rhinox hide, before moving on to just Baylor Brown afterwards. The next layer was a 50-50 mix of Screaming Skull and Baylor Brown. I then moved on to just pure Screaming Skull before giving it a wash. I then re-highlighted using my 50-50 mix of Brown and Screaming Skull, and afterwards using just Screaming Skull as my last highlights. With the bone complete, we move on to the red scales on the cape and on his shoulder pad. I then moved to a corner edge dry brush over the purple. I then used my fist on red as a dry brush over the corn. I then made a wash with some really old fist on red that started to separate, and it looked quite good, so I decided to use it. I then re-dry brushed my fist on red over the scales. I then moved on to Evil Sun Scarlet of dry brush where all the lightest areas would be. I then did a rough recess shade with Juji Violet in the recesses of the cape. I then started to paint the cape using Caliban Green for my base coat. I then started to do rough highlights with Warpstone Glow. The next highlight was Moot Green over all the highest points. I then did a glaze of Weight Watcher green over the cape. From this point onwards, I'm experimenting with a different editing style and I got a new camera, so therefore it's going to look a bit different and the pose itself is different, so bear with me. If you prefer it like this, please put a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe. Anywho, let's get back to painting. For all the gold bits, I'm going to do some experimenting and try some non-metallic gold. So I'm going to use a base coat of Bale Brown with a mix of Rhinox hide, 50-50, and we're just going to layer it on everywhere. We then move on to Rhinox hide in the recesses and Bale Brown on all the high points. For the next highlight, I use Bale Brown and Flash Gets Yellow on a 50-50%, again just making sure to get all the high points. Afterwards, I used the previous mix and Lemon Yellow by Vallejo as my next highlight. I then used pure Lemon Yellow on its own, and this is my first time doing non-metallic metal gold, and though it may not be the best attempt, my god, it is hard and it is good though. It is worth trying. It's not too hard to do, it's just hard to master, which is why I'm trying to do it, because I'm enjoying it. For my last highlight, I used Lemon Yellow mixed with a bit of white, and that was for all the major edges and the highest points on the model. I then used the glaze of Bale Brown, however afterwards I didn't like it too much, so I decided to also do an Adrax Earthshade wash all over. For the magazine of the Stone Bolter, I did the same technique as the Armour, however at the end I didn't use a blue wash, it was more towards the black. For the Stone Bolter itself, I decided to go with a red casing like the rest of my guns, and that started with a corn red base. I then did the next highlight with my fist on red. For the Crux Terminatus, I used my greys and I just kept building up the highlights from Dawnstone all the way up to pure white. I then did loads of little different details such as the purity seals, any parchment, and as well as the handle, and then I moved on to the metal parts where I did the same recipe as my Armour, however I didn't give it a wash, so it was just a black to white gradient. And now I've gone to the fun part with all the flames. For the base coat of the flames, I used the white paint. Afterwards I used Bad Moon Yellow contrast paint, and then all the way after that was just pure dry brushing from my reds, oranges and blacks to get the effect I wanted. And with a bit more work, this is the final result. I'm quite proud of it, bear in mind it's my first time with the heavy non-metallic metal style throughout and lots of layering. However, I enjoyed it. Hope you as well have learned something, enjoyed the painting process, and it'll be a great favour if you could leave a like and subscribe. With that, have a good day.